Today we're covering 7th grade, Chapter 6, Lesson 4, Slope-Intercept Form. So we've already talked about what the slope is. That's the angle of the line, rise over run. Y-intercept is the y-coordinate when the line crosses the y-axis. Remember, we have our coordinate grid, and this is the x-axis, and this is the y-axis. And when we graph our line, wherever it crosses that y-axis, that's called the y-intercept. So whatever number that is, would be the y-intercept. And we put it into this very specific formula that looks like this. Y equals m times x plus b. M is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So slope-intercept form is an equation written as y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So let's look at some different equations and see if we can identify the slope and y-intercept. So we're going to look at these equations. Remember, the number in front of x is always the m, or the slope. So the number in front of x on this one is 6. And the number by itself, that's called the constant. That's the y-intercept. So that's 3. Even if that has a decimal, the number in front of it, in front of the x, is the slope. And the number by itself is the y-intercept. Even if that number is a fraction, that is the slope in front of x. Whatever number we're multiplying times x is the slope. And the number by itself is the y-intercept. Okay, but this time it wasn't plus. And our formula says it has to be plus. So if it's not plus, then it must be negative. So this one is -7. The next one, the number being multiplied by x is 4, so that's the slope. But then there's not any number being added. So if there's nothing being added, nothing would be 0. The y-intercept is 0. And if you think about it, y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So if my line crosses at 5, the y is 5. That means the point is 0, 5. So x is 0 and y is 5. Then if it's 0, if the y-intercept is 0, that means it had to cross right here because x has to be 0. The y-intercept is always where x is 0. That'll make it easier for you to find when you're looking at a graph. If you can remember that x has to be 0, what's y? Okay, last example. Well, I see the number by itself, so the y-intercept has to be 5, but there's nothing in front of x. Well, x is the same as 1x. Just if there's a 1 in front, if there's only one of it, if I'm multiplying by 1, I don't usually put the 1 in front, but it is assumed. So slope for this one is 1. Let's look at some of the problems that you're going to do by yourself. On each equation, you're going to identify the slope and the y-intercept. Let's look at maybe number 4 here. The number being multiplied by x is the slope, so that's -3. And the y-intercept is the number by itself, so that's 1. What if, though, it's not in slope-intercept form? We can't identify it until it has been placed in slope-intercept form. So we need to move that x to the other side of the equation. So the way we move something to the other side of equations is to do the opposite. So the opposite of minus x is plus x. So if I plus x to both sides, then the x's cancel, y is by himself, and on the right side I have 8 plus x. So what number is in front of x? No number. And I told you when there's not any number, we assume it's a 1. So the slope is 1, and the y-intercept is the number by itself, so that's 8. Most of the equations are pretty easy. You do have to identify the slope and y-intercept for a line going through a graph. So I told you that this is the y-intercept. That means on the y-axis, I need to have a dot at the 2. And then I can plug in any other number I like and find another point. So if I plugged in maybe a 3, so it's 3 plus 2. So my x is 3, and the y is going to be 5. So that's 3, 5. And go over to the right 3 and up to 5. And that's enough to make a line. So first find your y-intercept, and then you can plug in a number. You can also just use the slope, and the slope on this one would have been 1 because there's not anything in front of the x, so the slope is 1. That means if I go over 1, I go up 1. Over 1, up 1. Over 1, up 1. That makes my line.